That's good. Well, let me do a kind of a small intro. For those of you who don't know me or Sandler, we're a kind of a revenue transformation consultancy. That's kind of how we position ourselves. And fundamentally, what we do is we work with founders, owners, commercial leaders, if you will, of small to medium-sized businesses. And fundamentally, when we're working with them, they are businesses that have got a great product, they've got a great solution, great offering, they've done great things to sort of get their world to the market that they are engaging in. And yet, when we start engaging with businesses, it's typically when they've done excellent work to getting to the level of where they want to get to, but they feel that they could be doing a little bit more. And typically the kind of things that we hear from them is that they get frustrated when they're not getting in front of the right decision makers. And those decision makers are not clearly defined in terms of their ICP, and therefore they're not growing at the pace that they want, which is putting sort of pressure on their overall revenue generation. Or even if they are getting in front of the right decision makers, some of the things that gets concerning is that they're unable to progress opportunities to getting a decision from that decision maker. And in fact, more organizations today, B2B, decisions are not being made. And therefore, that's having a significant impact on their overall cash flow to the business. And even if they are getting decisions from those decision makers, one of the big frustrations that are happening is that in order to get a deal and an opportunity across the line, those decision makers are expecting significant discount, significant reduction in pricing. And therefore, that's putting a lot of financial burden profit-wise on a business's ability to make money. So that's the sort of things that we find when we're engaged with owners of businesses. And so what we do is we kind of help them put systems, strategies, and structures in place, and skills in some cases, in order to help them facilitate a change in their revenue ambitions. So that's kind of Sandler and me in a nutshell. As Ollie said, as I'm talking about this subject today around demand fulfillment versus demand creation, hey, listen, I'm absolutely not going to tell you anything new that you don't already know. And as we're going through this, I'm going to continue to tell you nothing new that you don't already know. So you're probably sitting here going, this is going to be a great 30 minutes. But let me just put this to you. I'm hoping what I will share with you is a couple of things that might get you rethinking slightly differently about this distinction. And I suspect that all of you, being the smart business owners, business leaders, founders that you are, you will know absolutely the distinction between demand fulfillment and demand creation. Anyone want to sort of put their hands up out of the parapet and say, in your world, what is that distinction? Just to see sort of what I'm hearing from the crowd. What's your perception between the two? Because we might end up making this meeting 3 minutes as opposed to 25.
Well, I guess it's does the customer already know that they want what you sell? If yes, then it's demand fulfillment. If no, you've got to create that demand first.
Yeah, I like that, Chris. I think fundamentally there is a recognition that when a customer has a viewpoint that they have a defined problem that they need to figure out, they're going to look to fulfill that. But equally, that means that the solution that they're looking to fulfill, the vendor or the supplier of that is simply writing an order. Okay? So there is a dramatic shift happening in the marketplace today, and not necessarily every single industry. Not every single industry, but there is definitely a shift happening. And what I think we should contend with is this. is that no matter when you're engaging with a buyer, the problem that that buyer brings you is never the real problem. And regardless of whether or not we are in a motion of fulfilling demand or creating demand, and we'll get into some specifics about this, fundamentally, the buyer never brings you the real problem. And here's the reality. The reality is that every single business out there has problems. Doesn't matter what business you're in. Your business, your customer's business, every business has problems. And every business wants to get rid of those problems, but no business ever wants to admit that they have those problems. And this becomes equally more challenging when we're in situations by which the marketplace is evolving and the conditions of the way the buyer is engaging with sellers is also changing. So we know fundamentally that over the last couple of years, buying behaviors have dramatically shifted. And what's really, really interesting is that traditional buyers, traditional interactions with a B2B business is they're actually shifting the way they interact and engage with other businesses that are more congruent with how they behave as a consumer. So if you think about this, what's the biggest change in the way a consumer buys today versus the way they bought 10 years ago? And there's one platform particularly that's dramatically changing the way consumers engage.
Can I say something, Justin?
Andre, go on.
Um, I know where you're coming from with the platform. I've been in business and in the property industry for over 30 years. When we started out, it was getting on the phone, speaking to those people directly, getting their phone number. I don't think it's a problem. We technology has come a long way in that period of time, but there's so much noise out there at the moment. There's so much. There is actually so much opportunity, but I firmly believe that people are just getting inundated with too much stuff. That
Disagree.
what actually then tends to happen is they get overwhelmed by it all,
Totally.
right? And then no decisions are then made. It's just the way in which everybody's brains work. If you've got too much information going on, it's like if you do your daily list, right? What do all the billionaires in the world say?
Yep.
Right?
Don't
Do a
disagree with
daily
that.
list, do
Don't
5
disagree.
things.
Yep. No, I totally buy into that. There's a whole bunch of noise out of there. But the reality that's also changing is that because of the way we are buying as consumers, it's influencing and changing the way we buy as buyers in commercial realities. And the big driver of this has been Amazon, right? The big driver of this, think about it. We as a consumer, we're thinking about a problem, an issue, a need that we have. We go to Amazon and we solve that problem instantaneously. And so what's translating into the business world is that fundamentally between 80 and 84% of the buyers out there do not want to talk to you. 80 to 84% of buyers do not want to talk to you as a consumer of their solution, of their options. And again, this is the shift that's happening in the marketplace because we are now behaving in business like we behave as a consumer. So we go to Amazon, we figure out what we need, we click, we buy. We haven't interacted with any buyer on any level. So think about it. When you used to walk into retail, you would go into retail and a retail salesperson would come up to you on the shop floor and they would say, hey, Max, well, of course they wouldn't know your name, Max, right? But they would say, hey, can I help you? And your instantaneous response was, no, thanks, I'm just looking. And now we don't even have to have that level of engagement with a buyer. So Gartner research has now recognized that not only do buyers not want to engage with the seller is now confronted by this reality, is that buyers are already 70% the way through their decision-making process before they even decide whether they should interact with you or engage with you. So not only do they not want to talk to you, they're making the decision about you, and they've already got to a high degree of conclusion that what they need, they've decided on well before they're engaging with a potential solution for the problem that they have. But to add insult to injury, at any one time, less than 5% of buyers are actively in a buying mode. And this is actually the Ehrenberg Bass Institute heuristic that's recognizing that when we're in a B2B interaction, less than 5% of buyers are actually actively looking to buy and solve a problem. And therefore, that means that somewhere in the order of about 95% of businesses are content with what they have, or they're not at least willing to engage with other B2B solutions. So when you think about this, when there's a shift in the marketplace, you've got a very narrow spot. But here's some research that's also been maybe giving us a bit more sense of encouragement, which is Sixth Sense have recognized that actually there's about 40% of buyers who are kind of in a passive state. They're not actively looking to solve for a problem, but actually they are open to consideration. They're open to perhaps an alternative, which doesn't mean that they are locking opportunities out. They are simply, perhaps while they're content with their current solution, they actually might be open to an engagement, and therefore they're re-evaluating whether in fact the solution that they have is in fact the right solution. And so if we simply recognize that active buying is where demand fulfillment comes in, where a buyer has sat there and gone, okay, I've got this problem, I now need to go and solve for it. Demand creation is where we have to go to identify through our well-defined ICP. Everybody knows what I mean by ICP. Ideal client profile. Okay, this is a highly defined construct about who your ideal client is. You now need to have the ability to go out and create demand with those contented buyers to make them reevaluate, to make them reconsider, and perhaps even to be able to identify opportunities that you can help them address that they didn't even realize they had as a problem. So the shift that we're seeing in this regard is that we know, and you've all experienced it, you're all experienced business operators, you've lived the journey, that when tides rise, all boats rise. And so when the economy is growing and things are buoyant and everybody is making huge amounts of cash, I mean, obviously, right after COVID, every single business in the world was just pulling, I mean, it was robbing, it was stealing money from buyers. because every buyer was willing to give out cash, right? It was so easy. But that's not the reality today, right? The reality today is that we are now having to figure out how to steal share from a shrinking pie. We have to be able to steal share from a shrinking pie where the industry sectors that we're operating in are either stagnant or they're rising. So stagnant or they're shrinking. And that is a massive shift versus where things have been for the last number of years. Peter, you've got a query.
I have, yes. This, from what you're saying, it seems to be that it makes it very difficult for people like myself in new technology to actually enter the market. Because first off, you've got to identify who the buyer is, and that buyer, if he's buying, is probably very busy because numbers of buyers have probably been cut down if they're buying from the same buyers, same suppliers all the time, and they're happy with what they're getting, and they're not looking outside of their outside of the box, basically, to see if there's anything new that could possibly help them.
It's really tough. It is really, really tough. And so we have to be, and we'll get into this a little bit more detail, Peter. We have to be taking a much more different strategy to this, which is not easy, which is definitely not easy. It is tougher, without question. Business development today has never been tougher because what Andre said, there's a lot of noise out there. There's a lot of just clutter everywhere. Is very difficult to penetrate. And so what has happened in the past is that business development was in a situation. Let me say this. Who wouldn't want their buyer, their prospective ICP, to be picking up the phone and calling you for whatever it is that you sell? Who wouldn't want that all day long? Right? We do, right? We would love that. Oh my God, fantastic. And even in good times, that was tough. But fundamentally, we tended to wait for opportunities to flow in. And we took a relatively reactive approach to business development. And when you're a small business or you're a scaling business, actually what we don't do is we don't allocate enough amount of proactive time to business developing. Because as leaders, owners, founders of businesses, you're juggling multiple hats. And even if you've got a good commercial team behind you or a good sales engine behind you, typically they're spending between 25 and 30% of their time business developing. But when we are in a situation where we need to be proactive about this, that requires a significant amount of additional time, resource, and effort in order to be able to go out and proactively develop your opportunities. Now, the other thing that's beginning to happen is that now we are looking to figure out how to steal share from a shrinking marketplace. There's a big conundrum here. Do you need to be better than your competition or different than your competition?
A bit of both, probably.
Okay, Max, I'll go with that. I'll go with that. I would say that in economic times when buyers were just buying, and then you were competing with everybody else at the same level. My view is that you had to actually be better to be considered. But today, because you're looking to be able to compete in a shrinking marketplace, you actually have to differentiate yourself by being different.
Can I
And being gone.
Can I just jump in and
Yep.
kind of ask your opinion on something around that? Because
Absolutely, Mike.
yeah, I've been in sales for a long time. It's something that I'm quite passionate about, and I think it does get very complicated. And I think that some of the old things still remain true. So for me, relationships are still the number one thing, right? And I think your point
Absolutely.
is, how do you start that relationship? You know, that's the key point. And I don't like my experience is I don't think that any product, like I don't think our product is necessarily better than the next product. I think there's plenty of room for lots of products doing similar things to what we do.
I totally agree, Mike. And that's why this distinction between better versus different is crucial. So you have to be different. Fundamentally, you have to be different. And actually, therefore, how you sell has to be different. Julian?
Yeah, I wanted to sort of chip in at the sort of invention end, defining unmet need. I think chimes with what you're saying. It's a creative process to understand user requirements, but then creatively define something which is going to fulfill that. And if you can introduce a new metric that nobody else uses, that's possibly a way that you can be different, because even if you're sort of in the same space, if nobody else is measuring what you're measuring, or looking at that aspect, you've differentiated in some way.
Yeah, I love that as well. Which again, it's putting a spin on something to get your prospective customer buyer to look at you differently based on how you are going to market, how you're representing yourself, and the difference is this, in my view, Julian, is that all too often, and I think I may have mentioned this the last time, and a lot of marketers hate me for saying this. All too often, when we go to market, we come up with a value proposition that we think is going to be the message that actually is going to help create that differentiation. And while in some cases it might, we all too often work very, very hard on our value proposition to try and get that buyer to give some consideration to the value you could bring to their organization. But the reality is the buyer does not care one iota about what you do. They do not care one iota about what you have to solve. They don't care one iota about your service, your solution, you're offering, your product. They don't care. The only thing they care about is their problem. And as I said, every buyer has a problem. They want to get rid of that problem. They just don't want to admit that they have that problem. So in order to create a way of creating differentiation and being different, is that I would advocate that you spend time developing your problem proposition, which is 100% focused on your buyer, 100% focused on the issues that they are dealing with. And the reality is that we now need to shift from recognizing that buyers no longer are necessarily 100% aware of the problems and the pains that they have. That means you've got to be now much more based on the research that you're doing, based on the insights you're doing, based on the market understanding that you're doing. You now have to be able to help the buyer become aware of pains that they don't necessarily even know that they are aware, that they are experiencing. And that's a different shift, and it's tough. So how do you put that spotlight on pains that they themselves aren't even aware of? That requires a very different conversation. So equally, while we're focusing on driving awareness of pains that your buyer doesn't even recognize that they have, you then have to move away from what had been traditionally done as generic, tactical, quantity-driven outreach. And this comes back to, Peter, what you now need to be thinking about is you've got to be spending time. People used to say that sales is a numbers game. It's absolutely not a numbers game. It's a quality game. You have to fundamentally know your well-defined ICP, who's that ideal client profile, and you have to now become hyper personal in how you engage with them. So it's no longer about, I use a bad analogy here because this is not your space, but I've been working for the last number of months with Dow Jones, and their pipeline is huge. But they've got stuff in their pipeline that is 2 years old. This is what we call fluffy pipeline syndrome. Stuff that is just full of rubbish. Now, they're dramatically changing that to recognize that let's truncate our pipeline, get it to quality, focus on the quality of your pipeline in order to be able to then be hyper specific about how you go down that path of identifying the quality of the opportunities. And in doing so, that's then going to shift the way you engage so that your focus should be on a very, very tight, small pipeline of quality opportunities that you are going to then move from being transactional in your interaction from a sales skill perspective to much more consultative. And again, this is requiring a very different set of competencies, from insight selling to storytelling to multiple channel engagement to account-based selling, which is hyper personalized. Going back to your point, Mike, this is still about relationships, but it's relationships being built in different ways across, again, multiple channels. This is now about actually being able to manage complexity in a way that you've never had to manage before. How do you handle objections in a way that you've not had to handle before because a buyer was now, well, they used to be so sort of just almost opening their purses up to you. So if we kind of start dissecting what this actually looks like, demand fulfillment is really a responding to a series of inquiries that were kind of easily and naturally flowing to you. You now need to become the creator of awareness of your offering, of your solution, and equally of the pains and the problems that your buyers have that they don't even realize that they do have. That's going to be a massive shift. How do you change that perception of what you can help them address? Because again, they may not even be aware of those challenges that they have. And you've got to be super targeted on those pain points. You've got to be super targeted on the pain points that they don't even realize that they're dealing with. And ultimately, this shifts to what we now are recognizing is a much more proactive approach to business developing. So instead of winging it where you are kind of being unstructured in your interactions with that buyer, not being able to clearly define their problem issues, you now have to be much more defined in your prospecting plan and strategy. And while, as I said at the top of the session, I'm not going to tell you anything you didn't already know, I haven't told you anything you didn't already know. I'm hoping all I'm doing now is putting a spotlight on the reality of where you have to shift your attention in your business in order to create that demand. It's a very different engagement. It's a very different skill base. And like anything in the world of any development, whether it's in your business, whatever you're doing at home, if you want success, you've got to have the right mindset. You've got to be putting the right measurable activity and behaviors in place and utilizing the right techniques in order to be successful. So I'll stop there, Ollie. I know that was kind of a whistle stop tour. Hopefully it gave some things for you guys to consider and think about. As I said, I wasn't going to tell you anything you didn't already know. I've not told you anything you didn't already know. Now I want you to think about what what I've said and how you might recalibrate or may think differently about certain things.
That was tremendous. Thank you very much, Justin.
Well, I don't know if it was tremendous, but
I think it was. Any questions for Justin, or any points about how this affects you and your business, and when you're looking at Peter?
Yeah, it's very good actually, and it was very thought provoking. So it's made me think about how I can adjust my strategy to improve it really, and be a success. Thank you very much.
Well, I hope it can, Peter. And in fact, if you want, can I do something, Ollie, which might be annoying to everybody, but if you grab that QR code here, Peter, there's a self-assessment tool on here that you can use that puts some spotlight to your business around some areas that again might give some help on evaluating some of the strengths in your business that you might want to reflect on and change. So if that tool would be helpful,
Yeah,
by all
got
means,
it.
grab
Thank
it.
you.
Yep, perfect. Sorry, Ollie. Julian,
Julian.
see your hand is up.
Yeah, thanks. This, I was sort of reflecting on in the healthcare sector, B2B are clinicians, and clinicians have to satisfy customers, patients.
Yep.
And I think there is possibly sort of we're seeing a shift with patient satisfaction becoming a driver as opposed to patient acceptance of what they're given. And that sort of maybe plays into all of what you're saying in perhaps right across healthcare and sort of other, and maybe far more generally, where the business is satisfying other customers. Those are the drivers which are sort of shopping around now in ways that they haven't before.
You know what's interesting in that, Julian, is that and we often say this to our customers, when we're engaging with a business, when we're engaging with an organization, it's not the organization that buys. It's the person, it's the people, right? You know, people make the buying decision, and because we are generally more buyers of consumer product than we are of business to business product. Again, the shift in heuristic is absolutely affecting and playing into the way buyers engage and interact with a seller, and they're interacting more as a consumer from a B2B perspective than they are from a consumer from a sorry, let me restate that. They're behaving more like a consumer than they are a business to business buyer, if that makes sense.
Mm.
And so we've always said, and again, you'll know this, buyers buy emotionally, they make their decisions intellectually. And even though in certain buying organizations, you could say that is a very different interaction, fundamentally, that emotional decision, that emotional interaction is becoming equally and even more prevalent today because of that consumer mindset that they have when they're bringing themselves into the realm of being a buyer in a B2B environment. And we can't discount that. And that's why focusing in on pain is so much more crucial than focusing on that value proposition. Colin, was that a goodbye or was that a hand?
Not a goodbye. It's been really interesting, Justin. Thank you. How do you overcome the situation where I've got a piece of software, I demo it to compliance officers, they love it. They then got to go to the board who are not on the call and not emotionally connected. who invariably say, what do we want that for? So how do you sort of overcome that? I suppose would be my...
It's definitely getting trickier because buying organizations are expanding. They're getting more complex. There's first off, there's a need to understand what that stakeholder map looks like.
Yeah.
Who's going to be involved. And at all of those levels, they are going to have different pain points.
Mm.
And you need to know what those different pain points, you then need to be able to identify with that internal champion or coach that you have.
Yeah.
You have to then help them sell.
Right, I see. Yeah.
And they will only sell if they have become an advocate of you in the process. You have to be able to test that. There's different ways of being able to do that, but you have to be able to test that to make sure that they're going to be effectual. Ultimately, the ideal is obviously for you to be in that role to sell what you have. But if you can't do that, then you've got to pass the baton of power onto that champion and enable them to be able to sell. And you've got to be able to coach them through that.
Right. Okay. Thank you for that.
So just to add to that, Justin, think, Colin, about the letting agents, right?
Yeah.
Some are going to be big nationals, some are going to be independents. But if you're in there with the compliance officer and the compliance officer can turn around to that board, the owners, and say, look, if we don't get this right, you could end up with an unlimited fine or time inside at His Majesty's pleasure. So it's being able to get that message through to your contact so they can relate to the ones who are, you know, their backside will be on the line.
Yeah, I suppose from what Justin's saying there, provide them with that sort of strategic ammunition to sort of fire at the board, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, the risk that your compliance officer is willing to take is going to be a very different risk than the CEO or the board is going to take. And that measure of gap has to be identified between that compliance officer and how do they do that? Because again, we're all in sales, right? The compliance officer is in sales. He's selling up the board.
Yeah.
Do they have the skills to do that? Well, that's a different question.
Yeah. Good question.
Yeah.
No, it's been really good. Thank you.
Peter?
Yes, following on from what Julian was saying, that both Julian and myself are effectively selling to the public services. And the other dimension that comes into that are politicians. And unfortunately, that opens up a whole new ball game. It's much more difficult to move forward unless you can get a politician on side.
Yeah. And obviously, if you're dealing with trusts, if you're dealing with councils, public sector is without question one of the toughest channels to sell into. Creating advocacy with somebody internally who can then find access to that politician is a crucial dimension. This means that sales cycles are going to be long, but fundamentally, one of the things that we often hear played back from our clients is that they go, oh, we want to dramatically shorten our sales cycle. I'm going, well, that's ideal. What's more important in your sales cycle is actually whether you have control of it. And if you don't have control of it, doesn't matter how long it is. Because if you don't have control and you've abdicated control to someone else, you're completely at the mercy of your buyer. And so, especially in today's environment, to avoid, I think Gartner said that right now, because most sales competencies do not allow or do not know how to maintain control of the sales motion, 94% of buyers are not making decisions. So if you think about this from your own perspective, whereby you're not a great decision maker yourself, that will translate into how you engage with a buyer, and you will let them off the hook. And if you let them off the hook, when you've got that precious opportunity of being engaged with a buyer, they will take full advantage of you. They will not make a decision, and they go into witness protection, and you can't find them anywhere. And that's because you've lost control of the process. So you need to know how to manage and control the process.
Wise words. Any additional questions for Justin this morning? Dan?
It's not really a question. I just wanted to say thank you very much for your time today. I found it really insightful and really interesting. So just wanted to say cheers. Yeah, really useful. Thank you.
Good to see you, Dan. Thank you.
Yeah, likewise.
All right.
Yeah.
Well,
good ideas.
Hopefully there was some food for thought. Yeah, by all means, look at that survey if that's helpful for you to again continue thinking about areas of your business that you need to sort of unstick, so to speak, or get unstuck. Hopefully that survey gives you a sense of perhaps where some challenges might be in your business.
There was a lot of virtue and brilliance in what Justin tackled this morning. And I want to hear back from anyone who can apply what we've spoken this morning. They've had any measure of success, any response, any positive responses. We let us know, and I'll let Justin know as well, because this is why we started StandUp to stand up. If you have any benefit from what we put on 7 or 8 guest speakers a month, and this is a very, very important area, and a lot of what you guys have mentioned this morning, it's crucial to you. So please feedback any success. That'd be great. Justin, I think we've exhausted questions. You're welcome back anytime. You know that. We love having you on. So
good to meet you all
really good
indirectly. And yeah, we'll connect on LinkedIn, see where it goes.